The sky bled violet over Velmara's shattered horizon, its twin suns drooping like tired eyes behind a wasteland of skeletal spires and groaning metallic wreckage. The air smelled of scorched minerals and something far less poetic, the heavy musk of a predator on the hunt. Arasia crouched behind a half-melted support beam, her yellow hair tied back in a loose braid, long ears pressed tight against her skull. Her skin shimmered faintly, a natural reaction to the rising temperature as the beast drew closer. She tightened her grip on a blade so dull it would have struggled to offend a loaf of bread, let alone a 10-foot nightmare stitched together from the fever dreams of ancient Velmaran science. The ground vibrated beneath her, rhythmic, booming, a heartbeat from a god who had gotten bored and cruel. Arasia exhaled slowly. This was not how she had imagined her death. Sweaty, cornered in a derelict comms tower, armed with hope, a table knife, and exactly 2.5 insults that might confuse the monster into hesitation. She closed her eyes, one final act of defiance in the face of oblivion. Whatever would happen next, she would meet it with dignity. Across the wasteland, hidden behind a precariously balanced heap of debris, Ian McCrae squinted through the cracked lens of his scanner and muttered, "Well, that's definitely not a rescue party." The readings spiked. Biomass density off the charts, radiation levels flirting with, "Why not just grow a third arm already?" and seismic feedback suggesting a creature roughly the size and weight of a dropship. Ian adjusted the scanner, slapped it when it fizzed, and weighed his options. He could turn around, hike back to the safety of his crash pod, and eat 3 more days' worth of those horrifyingly orange protein bricks. Or, and this was the part of the plan that reeked of terrible ideas, he could run toward the thing currently making seismic art out of the landscape. The decision was made for him when the wind shifted, carrying a faint signal to his comms receiver. Static, broken words, and something unmistakably alive. A voice, and not just any voice. The clipped musical cadence of a Velmaran woman. "Oh, hell," Ian muttered, adjusting the battered plasma spear slung across his back. "Guess it's another Tuesday." He vaulted over the debris, boots crunching on the brittle, glassy surface of Velmara's ruins. The spear hummed to life, a sullen blue glow barely illuminating the swirling dust. As he ran, Ian's mind helpfully supplied a running commentary. "You're about to get eaten." "Probably. Definitely. You, my friend, are the dictionary definition of bad choices." He skidded around a collapsed bulkhead and saw her. A woman crouched like a wounded falcon, head bowed, weapon ready, poised on the trembling edge of disaster. And between her and survival, a creature born of metal, flesh, and whatever happened when ethics took an extended coffee break. Ian didn't think. Thinking was a luxury he had abandoned somewhere around the second explosion of the day. He let out a whoop that was, technically speaking, more panic than strategy, and charge. The monster turned, a grotesque mass of chitin and cybernetic limbs, one eye glowing red, the other a pulsing array of sensory nodes that zeroed in on Ian with unsettling precision. "Hey, ugly!" Ian yelled, voice cracking slightly. "Over here! Come get your daily recommended serving of idiot!" The monster obliged with surprising enthusiasm. Araja's eyes snapped open just in time to see a human, barreling into the fray like a badly programmed rescue drone. His armor was a patchwork of mismatched plates, his helmet dented enough to qualify as modern art, and his weapon looked about 2 seconds from catastrophic failure. Yet somehow, through a combination of sheer momentum, luck, and what appeared to be the world's worst cartwheel, Ian managed to plant the spear's tip squarely into the creature's exposed underbelly. Plasma surged. The beast howled, flailing in a cacophony of screeching metal and burning sinew, before collapsing with a final, earth-shaking thud. Silence fell. Dust hung in the air like ghostly confetti. Ian staggered upright, wiped a trickle of blood from his eyebrow, and turned to Arasia with a crooked grin. "Hey there, you look like you could use a friend, or a much better weapon." Arasia blinked, stunned. Then, despite herself, despite everything, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. The tower groaned ominously. Ian's grin faltered. "Okay, full disclosure, I'm not great at this heroic timing thing. So, Maybe we run now, he suggested brightly. The ceiling answered by dropping a sizable chunk of debris where Ian had been standing a heartbeat earlier. He yelped, grabbing Arasha's hand without waiting for permission and bolting through the crumbling wreckage. They stumbled into the open wasteland, panting, coughing, and laughing the kind of half-mad laughter that comes only after nearly becoming a meat pancake. Arasha jerked her hand back and turned to him, speaking in careful, accented standard. You are chaotic. Thank you, Ian beamed. I try. They stood there for a moment, two fugitives in a world gone mad, a human man and a Velmaran woman with stars in her hair and old sadness in her eyes. Arasha studied him, his ragged armor, his easy grin, the spark of madness, or courage, though she wasn't sure yet, in his gaze. Trust was a dangerous thing, but so was loneliness. The ground rumbled again in the distance. Not a beast this time, but a storm rolling over the broken mountains, dark and electric. Ian followed her gaze and sighed. Oh, great. Velmaran thunderstorms. $10 says the rain's acidic. Arasha arched an elegant brow. What is a bucks? Ian opened his mouth, then closed it again. It's a long story. Tell you over non-acidic beverages if we survive the next 10 minutes. For a heartbeat, the universe balanced on the knife edge between mistrust and necessity. Then Arasha, with a shrug that was almost imperceptible, stepped closer, nodding once. A silent pact. Right, Ian said, adjusting the plasma spear's ruined shaft. First order of business, find shelter. Second order of business, explain sarcasm. Third order of business, not die. Arasha tilted her head thoughtfully. You are optimistic. I prefer to think of it as delusionally confident, Ian quipped. Together they trudged toward the looming, broken hills, two mismatched figures silhouetted against the swirling, storm-torn sky. Velmara groaned and shifted beneath their feet, a world as wounded and stubborn as its newest, unlikeliest companions. The storm was coming fast, but so was something else, something harder to name. The first fragile threads of trust, spun thin but gleaming, between two lost souls too stubborn to die, and too foolish, or too brave to walk alone. And somewhere, deep in the ancient guts of Velmara, forgotten things stirred, sensing change. The storm rolled in with a sullen grumble, as if the sky itself were contemplating whether to murder them outright or merely inconvenience them for a few miserable hours. Ian squinted upward as the first fat, sizzling raindrops splattered around them, each one leaving a smoldering pit in the cracked ground. Acid rain, he said cheerfully. Called it. Pay up. Arasha gave him a sidelong look, unreadable. I did not bet. Well, now you owe me -$10. That's how gambling works where I'm from. Ian flashed her a grin. Arasha's long ears twitched in faint disbelief, but she said nothing, pulling the ragged hood of her cloak over her head. The cloth hissed where the rain struck it, but held. Velmaran fabric, Ian thought, impressed. Probably something fancy, like nanoweave or self-repairing synth fiber, both of which were about 100 tax brackets above anything he owned. They hurried across the ruins, weaving through the skeletal remains of once great towers and toppled statues half buried in the ashen soil. In the near distance, a skeletal mass of structures rose. An old cargo station, by the look of it, hunched and brooding against the darkening horizon. Ian pointed toward it. Shelter, unless it's haunted, in which case I'm totally okay with fighting ghosts. Add some variety. Arasha followed without comment, her movements smooth and measured, like a dancer who had seen too many battles to waste energy on unnecessary motion. Inside the station was a cavernous maze of shattered shipping crates, collapsed scaffolding, and rusted machinery. The air was thick with the scent of old oil and something distinctly unwholesome, like a wet sock forgotten in a spacesuit for too long. Ian immediately tripped over a severed mechanical limb and landed face first in a pile of debris. He said eloquently from the floor. I love what you've done with the place. Very post-apocalyptic chic. Arasha regarded him for a long moment, then bent down and plucked a piece of rusted rebar from his backpack, tossing it aside with delicate disdain. "You are inconveniently fragile," she observed. "I prefer artistically breakable," Ian mumbled, levering himself upright. They found a relatively intact corner of the station, shielded from the worst of the storm. Arasia set about building a small camp with the ruthless efficiency of someone who had spent her whole life surviving places that wanted her dead. Ian tried to help by gathering bits of dry scrap, managing only to acquire several new cuts and the growing suspicion that Velmara itself was personally offended by his existence. Arasia produced a small device from her belt, a palm-sized, disc-shaped generator. She thumbed a control rune, and with a soft whum, a shimmering energy dome bloomed around them, crackling faintly as it repelled the acid rain. Ian whistled low. "Now that's fancy tech. What do you call that? A don't-die bubble?" Arasia's lips quirked upward, just slightly. "Personal Environmental Shield, Mark 7. Yeah, I'm sticking with don't die bubble. Rolls off the tongue better." They sat in the dim shelter of the dome, listening to the rain sizzle and steam against the barrier. For a long while there was only the storm and the rhythmic drip of water from the broken ceiling beams. Then Ian, fidgeting with a cracked power cell, ventured, "So, are you going to tell me what you were doing out there all alone? Or is it one of those, I'd tell you, but then I'd have to kill you situations?" Arasia stared into the distance, her face shadowed and still. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. "I was searching for something lost," she said, "or perhaps something that never truly existed." Ian scratched his head. "Wow, cryptic. You could give fortune cookies a run for their money." She gave him a look, not hostile, but waited, as if deciding how much of herself she was willing to risk. Finally, she said, "I was part of a research contingent. Before Velmara fell." Ian nodded slowly. He remembered the briefing files from before the mission, the ones he had mostly skimmed while eating instant noodles. Velmara had been a jewel once, a center of scientific achievement, home to civilizations who bent physics and biology like sculptors molding clay. Until something had gone terribly, spectacularly wrong. Experiments gone wild, Ian guessed. The usual, "We thought we could play God, and it turns out God's job is harder than it looks" routine. Arasia's ears twitched again. Amusement, maybe, or regret. "Yes," she said simply. The rain began to lighten, tapering into a misty drizzle that still hissed against the shield. Outside the cargo station, Velmara's ruins stretched endless and desolate, a graveyard under a bruised sky. Ian leaned back against a toppled crate and sighed. "You know, when I signed up for this expedition, I was promised cutting-edge tech, good pay, and minimal exposure to lethal environments. I'm starting to think the brochure may have exaggerated a little." Arasia tilted her head. "Brochure? You know, advertisement, lies printed on fancy paper." "Ah," she said, "propaganda." "Exactly. Man, you're quick." There was a pause. Then, to Ian's astonishment, Arasia laughed. A soft musical sound that seemed almost out of place in the broken station. Ian grinned. "See? I'm growing on you already." "Like a fungus," she said dryly. "Exactly. Very hard to get rid of." The shield generator hummed softly as Ian closed his eyes, feeling exhaustion creep into his bones. Somewhere beyond the horizon, dangers stirred, storms brewed, and monsters no doubt plotted. But for now, in this tiny bubble of warmth and improbable companionship, things felt survivable. Maybe even a little better than that. Sleep tugged at him, heavy and insistent. Just before he drifted off, he heard Arasia's voice, quieter than before. "Thank you." He cracked one eye open. "For what?" "For being inconveniently fragile." Ian chuckled softly, the sound rumbling in his chest. "Anytime, pointy ears. Anytime." Outside, Velmara slept uneasily, but inside the flickering dome, against all odds, hope, stubborn, ridiculous hope, curled itself into a fragile, precious thing between them. Morning on Velmara wasn't so much an event as a grudging surrender. The skies peeled themselves reluctantly from black to a sickly gray, and the twin suns clawed their way over the fractured horizon, like tired beasts too stubborn to quit. The storm had passed, leaving the world damp, steaming, and no less unfriendly than before. Ian awoke to find Arasha already standing at the edge of their little camp, her cloak billowing slightly in the sour breeze. She was scanning the landscape with a battered monocular device, her long ears twitching at every distant sound. "Rise and shine," Ian croaked from his spot on the ground, half buried under what he suspected was a deflated cargo tarp. He yawned, stretched, and immediately regretted both decisions as his spine popped like an old satellite dish in a windstorm. "Status report, soldier," he added, sitting up and attempting something like dignity. Arasia didn't turn. "We are not soldiers." Technicalities." Ian struggled free of the tarp, victorious but distinctly less majestic than he'd hoped. "Anything exciting? Breakfast delivery? Space mail?" "Movement. West Quadrant. 3 signatures. Heavy mass. Erratic trajectory." Ian blinked. "And that means—" Arasia lowered the monocular and looked at him gravely. "Either large scavenger beasts, or very lost, very angry lawn equipment," Ian snorted. "I'm personally rooting for the lawn equipment. Less teeth." They broke camp quickly, Arasia expertly folding the shield generator back into its compact form, Ian stuffing debris into his backpack with the resigned air of a man who knew every gram would hurt later. He managed to jam his left thumb into a rusted vent plate and added another colorful word to his growing Velmara injury vocabulary. Together they moved through the cargo station's ruined hallways, sticking to the shadows where ancient beams and collapsed walls might offer some cover. The tension was thick but brittle, and Ian couldn't help but try to poke holes in it. "So, hypothetically," he said, keeping his voice low, "if the big scary things out there eat us, who do you think they'd find tastier? You or me?" Arasia glanced at him, utterly deadpan. "You. Humans are full of sugars and processed preservatives." Ian feigned defense. "Hey, I'll have you know I'm 90% organic. The other 10% is coffee and regret." She almost smiled. Almost. They edged their way toward a maintenance shaft leading out of the station, Ian going first because, as he put it, "I'm expendable and you're the mysterious, valuable one." He only partially meant it as a joke. As he ducked under a low beam, his boot caught on something. He looked down and froze. It was a drone, or what had once been a drone, a scouting model by the looks of it, designed for planetary surveys. Now it was little more than a twisted skeleton, its camera eyes shattered, its flight stabilizers clawed to ribbons. Ian knelt and brushed a layer of soot from the drone's chassis. Burned into the metal was a crude symbol, a circle split by jagged lines. Arasia," he called, voice tighter now. "Do your Velmaran bedtime stories ever mention creepy symbols carved into dead machines?" She crouched beside him, studying the mark with narrowed eyes. "That is not Velmaran." Her voice was a whisper, as if speaking louder might wake whatever had left the message. "Great. So good news. It's not your people. Bad news. It's someone else's people." Ian grimaced. "Or their evil robot cult. Both possibilities are deeply unappealing." From outside, a heavy thudding sound echoed, something large dragging itself through the station's remains. Arasia stood swiftly. "We must go. Now." No argument there. They sprinted through the maintenance shaft, boots clanging on old grating, breath misting in the chilly air. The shaft emerged onto a high ridge overlooking the desolate plain beyond. In the dim morning light, Ian could see shapes moving. Hulking forms, hunched and misshapen, lurching through the ruins with grim purpose. "They don't look like lawnmowers," he muttered. Arasia tapped a small device at her wrist, bringing up a holographic map. A thin blue line traced a path southward, toward what looked like a collection of domed structures partially buried in ash. "There," she said, "old research outpost. It may still have functioning equipment. Shelter." Ian grinned weakly. "Shelter sounds nice. Functioning equipment sounds even nicer. Functioning coffee machine sounds like a straight-up miracle." As they made their way down the ridge, keeping low and fast, Ian couldn't help but ask, "So, what are the odds that whatever wrecked this planet is waiting for us down there?" Arasia considered it. "High. Cool. No pressure. Ian wiped sweat from his brow and added, "Just once, I'd like to walk into an ancient facility and not find a homicidal AI, mutant rats, or a surprise end-of-the-world device." "Hope is irrational," Arasha said matter-of-factly. "Lady, irrational hope is basically my whole business model." They reached the base of the ridge just as one of the hulking forms behind them let out a metallic, ululating roar that made Ian's skin crawl. Whatever they were fast, and they were hunting. "We need a distraction," Ian panted, scanning the rubble-strewn field for anything useful. His eyes landed on a cracked fusion battery lying half-buried under a pile of scrap. He pointed. "That! Can you make it explode?" Arasha gave him a look of pure, exasperated professionalism. "Of course." She sprinted to the battery, pulling a small multi-tool from her belt. Sparks flew as she worked, fingers deft despite the urgency. Ian did what he did best, made noise. He shouted, whistled, banged a broken pipe against a fallen girder. Anything to draw the attention of the monstrous shapes behind them. The plan worked a little too well. One of the creatures, a grotesque fusion of organic muscle and mechanical plating, peeled off from the main group and came barreling straight toward him, howling in a voice that sounded like grinding gears and shredded lungs. "Arasha!" Ian yelped. "Done!" she shouted. Ian dove sideways just as Arasha triggered the battery. A pulse of white-hot plasma roared into the air, the explosion bright enough to cast the surrounding ruins into stark relief. The creature reeled back, shrieking, while Ian and Arasha bolted for the outpost with every scrap of speed they had. Behind them, the creatures regrouped, their furious roars shaking the ground. Ahead, the outpost loomed, battered, broken, but still standing. A promise of safety, a promise of answers, or maybe just another set of problems. But whatever lay ahead, Ian and Arasha were running toward it together. Stubborn, reckless, and bound by something stronger than fear, survival, trust, and the tiniest, most absurd flicker of hope. Even if that hope, Ian thought grimly, involved getting eaten by robotic mutant monsters before lunchtime. The outpost greeted them like a battered old dog, suspicious, half-collapsed, and very possibly infested with something unpleasant. The domes that once gleamed with polished alloy were cracked and scorched, their surfaces pitted with old impact wounds. Vines, if they could even be called that, more metal than plant, had begun to crawl up the sides, wrapping the structures like mechanical serpents reclaiming their territory. Ian staggered up the last slope, clutching a stitch in his side. "Remind me to file a formal complaint with, physics, for making uphill running so impossible." Arasha, barely winded, cocked a long ear at him. "You are inefficient." "Lady, I'm a finely tuned machine," he wheezed. "A vintage, finely tuned machine." They crossed into the shadow of the outer dome, Ian nervously checking over his shoulder. The creatures were still back there, somewhere in the ruined cargo station. He didn't see them now, but he felt their presence like a cold, metallic itch on his skin. The main entrance had collapsed under some ancient assault, so they picked their way around the side, finding a smaller service hatch mostly hidden under a drift of ash. Ian gave it a tentative kick. It rattled but stayed shut. "Plan B?" he suggested brightly. Without a word, Arasha pulled a slim black tool from her belt, something that looked suspiciously like a dental pick crossed with a laser scalpel. She jammed it into the seam of the hatch, twisted, and with a pneumatic gasp, the door popped open. "Velmaran locksmithing?" Ian guessed. "Battlefield improvisation," she corrected, stepping inside. The interior was worse, dark, cluttered, smelling faintly of burnt ozone and despair. Broken drones littered the floors like mechanical carcasses, and shattered glass crunched underfoot. Dim strips of emergency lighting still flickered weakly, casting long, twitching shadows. Ian stuck close behind her, flashlight bobbing in his hand. "If a killer robot jumps out, you're punching it. I'll just scream supportively." The central control room was a sunken oval chamber, surrounded by rows of dead consoles. At the far end stood a massive reinforced door, sealed tight, with a cracked terminal blinking an anemic red. Arasha knelt beside the console, frowning. She pressed a few buttons. The screen spat back an error message in blocky Velmaran script. "What's it say?" Ian asked, peering over her shoulder. She translated grimly. "System integrity, critical failure, containment breach, unresolved, manual override required." Ian took a cautious step back. "Did you say containment breach? Because that sounds very unpleasant slime monster to me." Araja's fingers danced across the terminal. She didn't answer immediately, her face drawn tight with concentration. Finally, she said, "This facility was designed for biological research. Dangerous research." "Define dangerous." Ian swallowed. She tilted her head, thinking, "Imagine your Earth sharks. Now imagine if someone gave them hyper-intelligence, exoskeletal armor, and the ability to walk on land." Ian turned visibly paler. "Okay, good. Good to know. Filing that under reasons to leave immediately." The door's lock hissed and clanked. Araja stood, stepping back as the massive slab of metal began to grind open. A burst of stale, freezing air gusted out, carrying the distinct smell of something ancient and very unhappy to be disturbed. "Or we could open it. That works too," Ian muttered. They entered cautiously. The chamber beyond was vast and circular, with rows of containment tanks lining the walls. Most were cracked or shattered, their contents long since escaped or decomposed into foul stains on the floor. Only a few tanks still hummed faintly, their interiors swirling with dark, viscous fluid. In the center of the room stood something Ian hadn't expected, a holographic terminal flickering erratically. Above it, a frozen image. A Velmaran scientist, her features sharp and severe, her long ears marked with ceremonial rings. Araja approached, studying the recording. After a moment, she touched the terminal. The hologram stuttered, cleared its throat, and spoke. "Project ALTHEON, final log. To any who find this, containment has failed. Our creation was unstable. It adapted beyond our controls, beyond our safeguards. We attempted to destroy it. We failed. Velmara has fallen." The hologram's voice cracked. She looked down at something unseen. "If you hear this, run. There is no salvation here, only extinction." The image froze, the last flicker of the scientist's haunted eyes hanging in the cold air. Ian let out a slow, unsteady breath. On the bright side, at least they left us clear instructions this time. Araja's gaze lingered on the hologram. Her mouth tightened, and for a heartbeat, she looked unbearably alone. Then she turned sharply. "We need supplies, weapons, data cores, anything we can carry." Ian nodded, swallowing whatever joke had been about to tumble out. Some moments weren't meant to be diffused. They moved through the wreckage, scavenging. Ian found a half-functional plasma cutter and a ration pack that might not have expired yet. An exciting discovery until he read the flavor. Extruded algae protein, citrus variant. He decided hunger might be the better option. Araja located a surviving data core, a squat, humming cube barely larger than her hand, and slipped it into her pack with a look of fierce determination. "So," Ian said as they regrouped near the main chamber's exit. "Question. The monster, the thing your people cooked up, it's still out there somewhere, isn't it?" Araja nodded once. "Yes. And the symbols we saw back at the cargo station? Related?" Another nod, grim. "Cool, cool, 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 cool." Ian exhaled. Just wanted to get all that horrifying context lined up nice and neat. From somewhere deep in the facility, a low rumbling growl answered him. Something big and ancient and very much awake. They looked at each other. No words needed. Run. They bolted for the entrance, the flickering lights flashing like strobe warnings. Behind them, the growl rose into a roar, metallic, primal, terrible. And still, through the thudding panic in his veins, Ian found himself grinning. "This," he gasped as they ran. "This is exactly why I don't join book clubs anymore." The sons of Velmara clawed higher into the sky as Ian and Araja tore out of the research outpost, lungs burning, boots skidding across the cracked earth. Behind them, the ancient facility heaved a guttural metallic shriek, the kind of noise that suggested very large things moving very fast in very wrong ways. Ian risked a glance over his shoulder, and immediately wished he hadn't. Something massive and glistening surged through the outpost doors, a nightmarish amalgam of synthetic plating and slithering tendrils. Its shape never quite settling into anything his brain was willing to recognize as safe. It moved like a bad idea given flesh, twisting and snapping at the air with mouths that were definitely surplus to requirements. "Well," Ian huffed, "that's going right to the top of my things I'm never telling my therapist about list." Arasha was already plotting their escape, scanning the terrain with sharp, quick glances. She pointed toward a cluster of half-buried transit shuttles, their hulls skeletal but still more solid than open ground. "This way," she shouted, taking the lead. They ducked under shattered fencing, hurdled debris, and skidded down a slope of loose gravel. Ian nearly tripped twice, saved only by Arasha grabbing the back of his jacket and yanking him upright with alarming efficiency. "You're very grabby," he panted. "You are very folly," she retorted, not even breaking stride. They reached the nearest shuttle, a once proud interplanetary transport now rusting like an abandoned toy. Its access hatch hung ajar, a black maw gaping in welcome. Arasha slipped inside first, Ian scrambling after her. He slammed the hatch shut and threw the manual lock, as if that thin piece of steel could hold back whatever cosmic horror was now sniffing around outside. Inside, the shuttle was a claustrophobic maze of narrow corridors and dangling wires. Emergency lights sputtered, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Arasha moved efficiently, checking systems with the casual air of someone who had survived worse odds. Ian, meanwhile, busied himself with the important task of not having a complete panic attack. "So, plan?" he asked, voice slightly higher than normal. Arasha pried open a maintenance panel and started tinkering with the exposed circuits. "Activate auxiliary thrusters, launch shuttle, evade pursuit." Ian gave a nervous laugh. "Sounds great. Love a good plan that includes the word evade. Just one teeny tiny question. Does this flying tin can actually still fly?" Arasha didn't look up. 42% chance. Ian's eye twitched. "Ah, so basically the same odds as me cooking pasta without setting off a fire alarm. Good to know." There was a shudder through the hull, a heavy, dragging sound outside. Ian held his breath. The creature, or creatures, were circling. Arasha slammed the panel shut and pulled him toward the cockpit. They stumbled into the cramped space, squeezing into cracked leather seats that had clearly not been designed with human comfort in mind. The control array flickered uncertainly as Arasha powered it up. She barked commands in rapid Velmaran, the shuttle groaning in protest like an old dog being asked to sprint. Lights blinked. Consoles stuttered to life. Somewhere deep below them, engines coughed and whined. Ian gripped the sides of his seat. "If this thing blows up, I just want it on record. I never learned how to drive stick." Arasha flipped a series of toggles. "It is not a manual vehicle." Ian considered this. "I still think I'll find a way to crash it." There was no countdown, no dramatic rumble of engines revving up to full power. Instead, the shuttle simply lurched upward with all the grace of a drunken walrus attempting ballet. Ian's stomach dropped straight into his boots as they rocketed, and he used the word generously, about 15 feet into the air before the thrusters cut out again, dropping them with a bone-jarring crash back onto the ground. Both of them sat in stunned silence for a moment. "Well," Ian managed eventually, "that was slightly less than majestic." Arasha shot him a look that suggested she was seriously reconsidering saving his life back at the cargo station. "Again," she said firmly. She restarted the thrusters, manually overriding safety protocols Ian was pretty sure had been there for very good reasons. This time the shuttle groaned but lifted higher, a juddering, coughing ascent that rattled every bolt and nerve in Ian's body. Below them, the thing roared in frustration, a sound that sent dust and debris spiraling upward in violent whirlwinds. As they clawed their way into the thin upper atmosphere, Ian slumped back in his seat, adrenaline finally giving way to exhausted, hysterical laughter. "We did it," he gasped. "We actually did it. We outran whatever that was. You and me. Team definitely not qualified." Arasha allowed herself a very small, very rare smile. For now, that dampened the mood slightly. The shuttle stabilized, engines coughing into a steady, if uneven, hum. Through the cracked cockpit window, Velmara stretched out below them, a wasteland of ruined cities, shattered highways, and the skeletal remains of once mighty spaceports. Ian's smile faded as he took it all in. This planet, it didn't just fall apart, did it? He said quietly. It was broken. Araja nodded, her long ears drooping slightly. Broken, she echoed. By fear, by ambition, by the belief that they could control evolution itself. Ian was silent for a long moment. Then he said, voice lighter but still sincere, for what it's worth, your people made at least one good decision. They made you. Arasha blinked at him, genuinely taken aback. I mean, Ian added quickly, grinning, you're bossy, you have an alarming talent for improvised explosives, and your idea of a good time is surviving near-death experiences. But still, solid choice. The corner of her mouth twitched. You are strange, he shrugged. Takes one to know one. The shuttle veered south, toward the hazy outline of mountains on the horizon. Somewhere out there, they hoped, was a working relay station. A chance to call for help, or at least figure out their next move. Below, unseen, the creature prowled the ruins, its many eyes turning skyward. It had not forgotten them, and neither, somewhere deep down, had Velmara itself. The shuttle's engines coughed again, protesting every mile they forced out of the battered frame. Panels rattled overhead with a whirring looseness, and every now and then a puff of smoke would squeeze out from somewhere under the controls, making Ian eye the cockpit like it was a ticking time bomb. I feel like we're flying a microwave that's been possessed by a poltergeist, he said, coughing dramatically. Arasha, focused on the cracked nav display, simply replied, be grateful it flies. I'm grateful, very grateful. I'm overflowing with gratitude. I'm so grateful I might explode. Ian slapped the dashboard affectionately. See? Bonding with the machine. That's a human thing. Maybe it'll feel loved and stop trying to kill us. A groan from the shuttle's hull suggested it had very strong feelings about that idea. They were banking low over what had once been a vibrant Velmaran city, now a twisted graveyard of metal and glass. Great towers leaned drunkenly against one another, fused together by time and disaster. Broken monorails coiled through the ruins like the skeletons of giant serpents. Here and there, the glint of autonomous drones, or what remained of them, caught the sunlight like fallen stars. Ian watched the devastation pass beneath them. This place must have been incredible once. Araja's voice was quiet. It was. She didn't say more, and Ian didn't push. Some wounds didn't like being poked, even by well-meaning idiots. Instead, he fiddled with the comm system, trying to coax a signal from the wheezing relics of Velmaran tech. Static hissed and popped through the speakers, punctuated by occasional bursts of something that might have been language, or just very angry seagulls. Good news, Ian said brightly. If we're attacked by a horde of hostile white noise, we're ready. Arasha allowed a soft snort, almost a laugh. There, she said suddenly, pointing ahead. Ian squinted. On the horizon, where the cracked plains met the jagged mountains, a thin silver spire stabbed upward, surrounded by crumbling outbuildings. The relay station, Ian guessed. Intact, Arasha confirmed. If we can activate its systems, we can send a distress signal. Awesome. Just one teensy problem, Ian said, frowning. That thing back at the outpost? It's smart, right? It'll figure out where we're headed. Araja considered this. Most likely. Wonderful. Ian drummed his fingers nervously on the dashboard. Any backup plans? You know, in case Plan A gets eaten? She tilted her head thoughtfully. Plan B is generally to improvise. Ian smiled weakly. Oh, good. Improvising has worked so well for us so far. The shuttle sputtered one last time as they neared the station. With a shudder that rattled every bolt in the frame, the engines died, and they coasted the last few hundred meters in a long downward arc. Soft landing! Soft landing! Ian chanted hopefully as Arasha wrestled the controls. The shuttle hit the ground with a screech and a lurch that sent both of them bouncing out of their seats. Ian let out a high-pitched squeal, that he would later deny ever making. When the dust finally settled, they staggered to their feet, bruised but alive. Technically, Ian wheezed, still a landing. Technically, Arasha agreed, brushing herself off. The relay station loomed ahead, a gleaming needle of ancient technology, stubbornly refusing to fall like the rest of Velmara. It pulsed faintly with internal power, a heartbeat in the dead landscape. They approached cautiously. Ian kept scanning the surrounding ruins, half expecting the monster to leap out at any moment, dripping fangs and bad intentions. Instead, the area remained eerily still. At the base of the tower, they found a maintenance hatch. Araja produced her multi-tool again, working the lock with deft precision. Ian leaned against the wall, trying to look casual, and immediately yelped as the panel he touched gave way and dumped a small, angry maintenance drone onto his foot. "Gah! Evil Roomba! Evil Roomba!" he shouted, kicking it away. The drone buzzed indignantly and zipped off into the ruins. Araja quirked a brow at him. Fearsome opponent. "I let it win," Ian muttered, limping after her. Inside, the relay station's core chamber was a marvel of lost engineering, a spiraling cathedral of light and glass, conduits weaving upward like vines toward a suspended data core that floated in magnetic suspension. Araja crossed the chamber without hesitation, accessing a console built into the wall. She plugged in the salvaged data cube from the outpost, fingers flying over the unfamiliar interface. Holographic screens blossomed into the air, filled with streams of Velmaran script. Ian stared at them. Yup, totally fluent in ancient space gibberish. Arasha didn't glance up. "It is not gibberish. It is the code of my ancestors." He mock saluted. "Respectfully noted. I'll just stand over here and not break anything." Data scrolled rapidly across the displays. Arasha's eyes narrowed. "There's something here," she said. "Old transmission logs. Hidden files." Ian leaned closer. "Secrets? I love secrets, especially the kind that don't immediately try to kill me." As she decrypted the files, an image flared to life. A map of Velmara, but overlaid with strange nodes and pathways Ian didn't recognize. "What's that?" he asked. "Escape routes," Arasha said slowly. "Safe houses, old evacuation plans. My people were preparing for the worst." Ian's brow furrowed. "But they didn't make it." "No." Her voice was tight. "But maybe some did." A beacon pulsed on the map, buried deep beneath the mountains. A place the creature hadn't found. A last hope. Before Ian could respond, a sharp, shuddering boom echoed through the station. They froze. The walls vibrated faintly. Another boom. Louder. Closer. Ian's voice was a strained whisper. "Tell me that's just the shuttle falling apart." Arasha's hand went to her sidearm. "It is not." The creature had found them. Of course it had. Ian exhaled shakily. "Plan B?" Arasha's eyes flashed with fierce determination. "We fight. We run. We survive." Ian gave a wild, breathless laugh. "Good plan. Very inspirational. I give it 4 stars. The wall shook again. Dust rained from the ceiling. The monster's roar split the air, impossibly close now, a sound of rage and hunger sharpened by unnatural intelligence. And still, even facing the apocalypse yet again, Ian couldn't resist a grin. "You know," he said as they braced themselves, "for a rescue mission, this has been weirdly on brand for my life." Arasha simply smiled back, sharp and fierce and ready. Together they turned to meet whatever nightmare came crashing through the walls. The wall didn't shatter so much as unmake itself, folding outward like a piece of paper given up on reality. Through the swirling dust and fractured light, the creature stepped in, if one could call that motion a step. It didn't walk so much as ripple into the room, every joint bending in ways nature should have vetoed at the prototype stage. Ian, weapon drawn but clearly out of his depth, stared at it. "Okay, I don't even know which part of that is supposed to be the face, or the butt, and I do not want to know if it has more than one of either." The creature responded by letting out a shriek that hit frequencies only dogs, and apparently Ian's molars, could fully appreciate. Arasha stepped in front of him, drawing her sleek plasma pistol, her long ears angling downward in irritation. "It is projecting dominance," she said. Ian blinked. "I mean, it's working. I feel very dominated." They backed toward the central relay platform, the data core humming faintly behind them. The relay station wasn't built for firefights. There were no blast doors, no security drones, not even a single SAT emergency turret that might fire a stern warning shot. Apparently, Velmaran engineers had not anticipated nightmare beasts with reality-bending biology crashing their communication parties. Arasha fired first, 3 sharp plasma bursts that streaked across the room and struck the creature's carapace with a hiss of seared fluid. It staggered, but didn't fall. Instead, it split, literally, its torso peeling open like a nightmare flower, revealing a pulsing core of glowing tissue that pulsed like a heartbeat. Ian screamed, "Nope! Nope! That's a second mouth! That's too many mouths!" The creature lunged. Arasha grabbed Ian's arm and shoved him sideways, both of them tumbling across the smooth floor as a clawed limb crashed down where they just stood. The floor cracked, spiderweb fractures racing across its surface like fleeing insects. They scrambled to their feet, darting between columns of alien circuitry and strange crystalline conduits that lit up at their passing. "Do you have a plan?" Ian panted. "I am developing one as we run," Araja replied, firing over her shoulder. A blast clipped the creature's leg. It hissed and wobbled, but kept coming. "Oh, good," Ian said. "My favorite kind of plan, desperate and undercooked." Then something clicked. Not inside the relay station, but in Ian's head. "The beacon," he gasped. "The map, Arasha, that escape route, the one in the mountains." She glanced at him. "The hidden facility. You believe it still functions?" "Nope. But I'd rather die in a long-lost alien bunker than here, in a space cathedral with a murder octopus yelling at me." "Fair." She grabbed his hand again, an instinct she hadn't questioned since the outpost, and pulled him down a side corridor just as the creature's claw sliced through the main chamber behind them. They ran. Lights flared overhead, reacting to their movement. Doors slid open just in time. One closed behind them a second before the creature slammed into it, the impact shuddering through the walls. Ian didn't stop running. "Did you see that thing's elbow bend backward? Backward. That is not an elbow. That is a crime." "Focus," Arasha snapped, though her breath came just as fast as his. "We must reach the auxiliary launch bay. Do we even have a ship left?" "Something will fly," she said. "If not, you may flap your arms." They burst into the bay, half collapsed, mostly looted, with only one remaining vessel wedged against a loading dock. It looked like a shipping drone that had been repurposed, forgotten, and possibly insulted by time itself. Ian stared. "That is not a spaceship. That's a soda can with wings." Araja was already climbing into the cockpit. "Soda cans can be surprisingly aerodynamic." "I hate that I believe you," he muttered, scrambling in behind her. The controls lit up with a low, uncertain hum, as if even the ship wasn't convinced this was a good idea. Panels flickered. A startup sequence wheezed into life. From somewhere inside, a mechanical voice stuttered through static. "Welcome to... Error. Launch sequence incomplete. Please refrain from panicking." "I can't even not panic in a complete launch sequence," Ian shouted. Behind them, the doors buckled. A shriek reverberated down the hall. Arasha's fingers flew over the controls. She reached behind the panel and yanked 2 wires together. There was a flash, a crackle, and suddenly the engines roared to life. The doors exploded inward just as the ship lifted off. The creature hurled itself forward, claws catching the rear of the vessel. But not quite. With a shriek of overtaxed engines and ancient metal, the ship shot through the bay doors, leaving the monster behind in a growing cloud of smoke and fury. They were airborne. Barely. The ship wobbled like a drunken insect. Ian glanced sideways. "Are we going to die?" "Possibly," Arasha said, grim but steady. "But with style." Ian leaned back, trying not to notice the sparks coming from under his seat. "Well, if this thing falls out of the sky, at least I'll die somewhere interesting." Arasha actually smiled at that. "And we have a heading now. The mountains." She adjusted the ship's course, locking on to the hidden coordinates from the data core. Outside, the broken world of Velmara passed beneath them, ancient and angry and waiting. "I just realized," Ian said after a moment, "you saved my life at the outpost. Now I've saved yours, so we're even." "Statistically," Arasha said, You still owe me 2.5 rescues. Ian considered this. What happens when I hit 0? You may receive a medal or a sarcastic poem. We Velmarans are unpredictable that way. He grinned despite everything. I think I like your people. They would have liked you too, she said softly, not looking at him. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful. Full of possibilities neither of them had dared to entertain until now. And somewhere ahead, buried beneath the mountains, something waited. A forgotten facility. A last hope. Maybe even a clue about the monster that stalked them, and what it really wanted. But for now they flew. Two unlikely survivors in a sputtering tin can, heading into the unknown, with no guarantees except that, whatever happened next, it wouldn't be boring. The mountains reared up like sleeping giants, scarred with forgotten wars and freckled with domes of alien stone. Araja guided the battered vessel through a narrow pass, the ship protesting every twist of her hands like a reluctant mule. Below them, avalanches stirred in the shadows. Above, the pale sun of Velmara hung low, casting copper light over jagged ridges. Tell me again how this hidden facility won't just fall on our heads the moment we land, Ian muttered, eyeing the instruments as if they owed him reassurance. Because, Arasha said, Velmaran architecture is elegant, enduring, and built to survive orbital bombardment. The ship's floor let out a metallic clunk. Ian glanced down. That wasn't an elegant sound. It was more of a defiant sound, Arasha corrected, easing the ship toward a landing plateau half buried beneath ice and stone. Like an old warrior clearing his throat. The ship skidded onto the platform with all the grace of a shopping cart on ice, grinding to a halt just shy of a yawning abyss. Everything went silent. The engines wheezed. A panel dropped from the ceiling and clattered at Ian's feet. Well, he said, stepping out, at least it didn't explode. That's progress. Araja followed, scanning the surroundings. The platform stretched into a hidden ridge, half swallowed by time. She tapped a control on her wrist. A faint blue glow shimmered along the stone, geometric patterns flaring to life, revealing a door. Velmaran, ancient, and still listening. Did I ever mention how creepy your technology is? Ian said. You've mentioned it 74 times, she said, placing her palm against the glowing seal. But you also keep following it, so I assume your fear is manageable. The door split open with a soft hiss. They entered a long corridor of polished obsidian, the air still and dry. Lights flickered on, following their steps. The silence felt less like abandonment and more like anticipation. I expected dust, Ian whispered. Spiderwebs, maybe a skeleton or two. My people preferred to die somewhere less dramatic, Arasha said. At the corridor's end stood a chamber, wide, circular, filled with consoles humming quietly, waiting for touch. A single dais rose in the center, surrounded by projection pillars. As Arasha stepped into the space, the chamber responded. Light burst from the dais. A hologram flickered into place. A Velmaran woman in ceremonial armor, ears long and proud, her face serene. Welcome, descendants, the recording began. If you have found this place, then Velmara has fallen. Our final weapon has been released. Ian leaned in. Weapon, the hologram continued. The obelisk, our answer to extinction, a synthetic predator designed to consume invasive biomass, but we failed to contain it. It did not recognize allies, only threats. It turned on us. We fled, and we sealed this place, hoping one day someone would stop it. The image dissolved. Araja stood in silence, her gaze distant. Then she stepped forward, activating another console. Blueprints flickered in the air, schematics, coordinates, biological scans. Ian squinted at them, recognizing the shape of the monster they'd fled. Okay, he said slowly. So this thing was a super guard dog that went full Cujo? Araja nodded grimly. It is drawn to communication signals, conflict, even panic, a predator of patterns. And we've been broadcasting like idiots, Ian added. She didn't argue. Wait, he said, pointing. That's a kill switch? A blinking node in the projection pulsed faintly. A resonance key, she said, buried in the mountains. It can trigger a feedback in the obelisk's neural web. disarm it, or destroy it. Please tell me it doesn't involve crawling into a volcano. No volcanoes, she said. Just an ancient elevator shaft, a few miles of ice tunnels, and several extremely optimistic guesses. He stared. Oh, perfect. Just a casual suicide hike. I didn't pack snacks. The descent was cold, narrow, and profoundly inconvenient. They climbed through collapsed tunnels, crossed bridges that groaned under their weight, and finally reached the chamber, a deep, humming vault of light and cables. The resonance key sat in the center, guarded not by traps but by silence. Stillness, a kind of sacred waiting. As Araja approached, Ian stood back. You sure about this? No, she said, but I've spent my whole life trying to fix what my ancestors broke. If this gives Velmara another chance, not just to survive, but to change, then yes. She pressed her palm to the key. It lit up. High above them, in some distant valley, the obelisk screamed. The vault shook. Lights flared. The kill signal burst from the vault in a ripple of invisible energy, streaking through the mountain, the air, the world. When it was done, the silence returned. But this time it felt like peace. 2 weeks later, Ian sat on a hilltop under Velmara's twin moons, chewing a flavorless ration bar and watching a shuttle descend. Araja stood beside him, her armor cleaner now, her posture straighter, but her eyes still carried the weight of everything they'd seen. Reinforcements, she said. My people are sending researchers, planners, builders. No more doomsday monsters, though? He asked, mouth full. She smirked. Only mildly dangerous ones, and better labeled. They sat in silence a while. Ian nudged her. You ever think about Earth? She tilted her head. Often. Your species is loud, chaotic, and entirely obsessed with cheese. Hey, cheese is emotional architecture. She chuckled softly, the sound genuine. You could return, you know. He looked out at the purple horizon. I could, but I think I found something here. She looked at him. He didn't explain. He didn't have to. And under the fading sky, with Velmara slowly stirring back to life beneath their feet, Araja reached out, not for her weapon, not for a tool, but for his hand. This time he didn't hesitate. They faced forward together, two pieces from different puzzles who'd found, against all odds, that they fit. And above them, the stars blinked quietly, less like watchers and more like winks from a universe that still believed in second chances.